Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about what's happening in the economy in China, and specifically to talk about the Chinese pension system. Now, up until recently, China was the largest country in the world in terms of population. It has a population of more than 1.4 billion. But it was recently overtaken by India as a result of the fact that the population has been in decline for the last 18 months or so. And one of the reasons why it's been in decline is that in 1980, China introduced a limit of one child per family. If you had more than one child, you were hit with heavy penalties. And as a result of that, the population has been shrinking and it's also aging. And it is now top heavy. And around 350 million people in China are already at retirement age. And that's more than the population of the USA, and that's quite a mind-bending figure. And China has one of the lowest retirement ages in the world. Men retire at 60 and women retire either at 55 if they work in a white-collar job or 50 if they work in a factory. And what that's doing in China is building up a huge amount of people who are hitting retirement age and are now dependent on the state. And the number of workers per retired people is reducing rapidly. And in a recent study undertaken by the Chinese Academy of Science, they forecast that the Chinese pension system will be bankrupt by 2035. So in today's video, we'll have a look at what's going on with the population in China. We'll look at how China compares to the rest of the world in terms of its retirement age. We'll have a look at what's going on with regards to youth unemployment, because there are now talks of reforming the system to let people retire at an older age. But the problem with that is that it's going to keep all of those jobs occupied. And there's already a major problem in China with regards to youth unemployment. We'll have a look at the proposed reforms that China is considering implementing and what the implications of all of this will be for China and its economy. But before we get started on all of that, I'd like to say thank you so much to everyone that's supporting the channel. If you're a long-term supporter, either through Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee membership or YouTube membership, thank you so much for that support. And I just had a look at my membership system, and I've got a lot of people who've been on that membership scheme for more than 2 years. So thank you so much if you're one of those people. And if you've bought me a coffee or sent me a YouTube super thanks recently, thank you so much for the time and the effort and the generosity involved in that. Really helps to keep me going, so thank you so much. The pension system in China is based on 3 pillars. The biggest of those pillars is the state pension scheme, so basically pensions that are funded entirely by the Chinese authorities. In addition to that, China introduced employer benefit schemes in 1991, which is only 33 years ago, and the uptake of those employer schemes has been very slow. And in 2022, it was estimated that there were around 80,000 of those schemes in place. And when you're talking about a country with a population of 1.4 billion, that is a drop in the bucket. And in addition to the employer schemes, Chinese individuals can also take out private pensions. However, those private pension schemes were only introduced in 2021, so they've only been in place for less than 3 years. And the percentage of the population that are paying into private schemes is absolutely minuscule. So the overall summary of the system is that the vast majority of people in China are fully dependent on the state system. It's estimated that less than 10% of people in China have any form of employer or private pension. Now, in terms of looking at how much Chinese individuals earn during the course of their lifetime, this chart compares the average amount of income earned per day in selected countries. And the different colours we've got here represent the different amounts of income. The brown section on the left-hand side represents people who are earning less than $2 per day. The orange section, people who are earning between $2 and $10 per day. The dark blue section, between $10 and $20 per day. The light blue section, between $20 and $50. And the green section represent people who are earning more than $50 per day. So as a comparison, let's look at the situation for the United States, which is the third section on this chart. You can see that there is a fraction of people that are earning less than $2 per day. There's also a very low percentage of people earning less than $10 per day. 6.3% of the population are earning somewhere between $10 and $20 per day. 35% of the population are earning between $20 and $50 per day. And the majority of people, 55%, are earning above $50 per day. Now, the reason that the amount people are earning is important when you're looking at pensions is that the more affluent members of society, people who are being paid more, are more likely to be able to afford to pay into a private pension scheme, and also they're more likely to be working for an employer that has a beneficial pension scheme as well. So if you're earning a lot, it's likely that you'll benefit from a private pension, an employer pension, and also the state pension. So you're covered on all three bases. The lower your income, the less likely you are to have a private pension and possibly not even an employer pension. If we now look at the situation in China, you can see that there are very few people earning less than $2 per day. In fact, the percentage is less than it is in the United States. However, the percentage of people earning between $2 and $10 is significantly higher and represents almost 50% of the population. 47.4% of people are earning less than $10 per day. A further 34.6% are earning between $10 and $20 per day. 16.2% of the population earn between $20 and $50 per day, and less than 1.4% of the population earn above $50 per day. So that means that over 82% of the population in China are earning less than $20 per day, compared with less than 10% in the USA. So a combination of the low income that Chinese individuals are earning, as well as the fact that employer and private pensions are still relatively new and aren't very common in China, means that the vast majority of the Chinese population are fully dependent on the state for their pensions. And that state system is now coming under increasing pressure as a result of the very low retirement age in China. As I mentioned at the start of today's video, the retirement age for women in China is 50 if you work in a factory and 55 if you work in a white-collar job, so an office job. And for men, it is 60. And those levels are some of the lowest out of all of the countries in the world. So let's take a look at how it compares to some of the other biggest economies. This chart shows the countries with the lowest retirement age for women in the world. And as you can see, China ranks right at the top of this list, along with Mongolia and Uzbekistan, where the official retirement age is 55. However, as I just mentioned, if you work in a factory in China, which, to be honest, covers a bigger percentage of the female working population than the white-collar workers, you actually retire at 50. So China is actually right at the top of this list on its own with regards to that level of retirement. And this table looks at the current retirement age for women in the G20, which are notionally the 20 largest economies in the world. And what this shows is that the current retirement age in the United States, Australia, Italy, the Netherlands and Spain is 67 if you're a woman. So there's no longer a differential between men and women in most countries in the world. There is a differential in China of 5 or possibly 10 years if you work in a factory. But in the interest of equality, most countries in the West have removed that differential. This table shows the countries with the lowest retirement age for men in the world. And what this shows is that Indonesia has the lowest retirement age at 58, followed by Bangladesh at 59, and China comes in at number 3 on the list, with a lot of other countries, including Turkey, South Korea, Saudi Arabia, and India. And if we compare that retirement age of 60 to the rest of the G20, you can see that the United States, the Netherlands, Italy, Australia, and Spain that we just talked about for women have a retirement age of 67. So there is a 7-year differential between those countries and what's happening in China. So at face value, China has a preferential pension system compared with most other countries in the world if you're an employee. However, the problem that China has is that it now has an aging population. This is the population pyramid for China, and if you follow the channel, I'm sure you'll be familiar with these charts, but if it's the first time that you're seeing it, this breaks down the population into 5-year age groups, from 0 to 4 at the bottom, up to 100 plus at the top. The blue section on the left-hand side shows the number of males in each of those categories, and the red section on the right-hand side shows the number of females. And the reason that it's called a population pyramid is that when you've got a growing population, you generally have more people in the younger categories, and so it looks pyramidical. Now, obviously, China's shape doesn't look pyramidical at all. It almost looks rectangular. However, it is starting to reduce towards the bottom. And this is as a result of the one-child policy that was brought in by China in 1980, which reduced the amount of children that were being born in China. And as a result of that, the population is now in decline. Now, if we focus in and look at the shape of the pyramid from 50 plus, so all of the people who are above the age of 50, you can actually see that it is pyramidical shaped at that point. But this actually represents a major problem for China because all of these people who are now above 50 are entering various stages of retirement. If you're a woman that works in a factory in China, you will already have retired at the age of 50. If you're working in an office in a white-collar job, then you'll be retiring at 55. And if you're a man in China, you'll be retiring at 60. There's no differential in terms of white-collar and blue-collar amongst the men. It's only for the women. What this data shows us is that 15% of the population, so 210 million people, are females aged above 55. So that 210 million have already retired. And a further 9.5% of the population are men aged above 60. So that's another 133 million people. So in total, in China today, 343 million people are at retirement age. And that is almost the same as the population of the USA, which is currently running at 345 million. So if you can imagine that, if you can imagine every single person in the USA being retired, including all the babies and everybody who's at school or university, all of those sort of things, everybody retired. You have to find the money to pay for all of those people. Now, historically, the way that state pension systems work is that the people at the bottom of the pyramid, all of those who are still in employment, will be funding a lot of those pension payments. So basically, the government take money from all of those individuals as part of their taxes and their contributions to the national state pension system, and they use that money to pay all of the pensioners. And that works fine if you've got an expanding population because you've constantly got more and more people entering the workforce. You can take money from them and pay them to all of the people who've retired. But as with any pyramid-shaped scheme, if you don't constantly have more people being recruited, then you're going to run out of cash. And that's the situation that China finds itself in right now. And if you look at the shape of this chart below the age of 50, you can see that there's a distinct narrowing, and that narrowing is actually getting worse. And so what we've got now is a situation where there aren't enough people entering the workforce to be able to pay for all of those retirees. And as a result of that, China is now having to rethink how it's funding its pension system, and it's going to have to change its retirement age. This chart shows the life expectancy of males and females in China dating back to 1950. Life expectancy for males is shown by the blue section on these bar charts, life expectancy for females on the orange section, and the grey line shows the average between the two. And what this shows is that back in 1950, the life expectancy in China was very low, 42.2 years for men and 45.7 years for women. However, over the last 75 years, there's been a significant improvement, apart from in 1960, when China was hit with a severe famine, and the life expectancy for men fell to 32 years, and for women, it fell to 35 years. However, the life expectancy for men in China today is 75.2 years, and for women, it's 81 years. And what that means is that men in China will be retired for more than 15 years, and so the state will have to pay their pension. And the situation for women is that the state will have to fund their pensions for 26 years if they were a white-collar worker and 31 years if they worked in a factory. And these length of pension payments are some of the longest in the world, and that's why the Chinese pension system is now under severe pressure and is at risk of going bankrupt. As a result of all of the problems that the Chinese pension system is facing, The Chinese authorities have announced that they are reviewing the system, and it's likely that the pension ages will be increased. But that actually causes more problems for China because although theoretically they'll be relieving the burden in terms of having more people working for longer, and therefore they can build up more cash and they won't have to pay those pensioners for as long, it's causing problems with the youth in China because youth unemployment is becoming a huge issue. And if the older people are kept on in their jobs for longer, that means there'll be less vacancies for the young to enter the workforce, and so this could cause a major issue. This chart shows the youth unemployment rate in China dating back to March 2023. And the scale on the right-hand side of this chart goes from 11% at the bottom to 22% at the top. And the reason that I wanted to go back to March 23 is that China recently changed the way that they calculate these figures. So we start off by looking at the situation in March, April, May and June 2023. In March 23, youth unemployment, so basically the number of people aged between 16 and 24 that did not have a job, was 19.6%. And over the following 3 months, that level increased to a high of 21.3% in June 23. So that meant that 1 in 5 young people in China did not have any form of employment. And obviously the problem with that is that if you don't enter the workforce by the time you're 24, it becomes very difficult to ever get a job because you don't have any experience, and so you become difficult to hire. Now, as I just said, in the second half of 2023, the Chinese authorities decided to stop publishing the youth unemployment data, and they decided to change the way that this was being calculated to exclude anybody that was looking for higher education. So basically, they were trying to move as many people out of the unemployed category and into other categories. And in December 2023, they announced that youth unemployment had fallen to 14.9%. Now, there was no explanation as to how that had happened, and the only assumption can be that people just got moved out of the category, that there wasn't the creation of a whole lot of new jobs that would have put 5.4% of the youth into employment. It's just that we're looking at different statistics here. But if we look at what's happened in the period between December 23 and July 24, which is the latest data that we have, you can see that there was a gradual reduction up until June when it got down to 13.2%. However, the data in July show that youth unemployment is now running at 17.1%. And this tells us that the problem of youth unemployment is not going away anytime soon in China. And in fact, it looks like it's getting worse. And if China does reform its pension scheme so that the retirement age is raised, it will mean that there will be less job opportunities for these young people to take up. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video because I think what's happening with the pension system in China is absolutely fascinating and is another problem that the Chinese authorities are going to have to solve. Now, if you follow the channel, you'll know that I've talked about China a lot over the last few years. And the Chinese economy is currently in severe difficulty. It's publishing data that show that GDP is growing, and it's forecast to grow by 5% in 2024. However, there are now concerns that it's going to miss that 5% target because things are slowing down quite rapidly. And China has been suffering from deflation over the last 12 months. It's actually seen a fall in prices on the shelves. And Chinese companies are suffering badly because the producer price index, also known as factory gate prices, has been in decline for more than 12 months. So basically, companies in China are selling their products today for less than they were this time last year. And we're talking about double-digit declines, over 10%. And that means that all of their profits are being wiped out, and potentially we've got somewhere between a third and 50% of all of the companies in China currently making losses. And on top of all of that, we've got the well-documented problems with the property sector, which is in turmoil and still hasn't sorted itself out. So there are multiple problems that the Chinese authorities are facing right now. And the pension system is growing to be one of the biggest ones because in a recent report, it was estimated that if China doesn't do something about the current situation, it will run out of cash by 2035. So what that means is that it won't actually be able to pay all of those pensioners. Now, they've already got around 350 million pensioners in China, and that figure is forecast to rise rapidly over the course of the next 10 years. And if it doesn't have enough money to pay them all, then those people are going to be destitute. And this could be a genuine situation where we see a major country collapse. If it can't afford to pay all of its old to survive, then it will be in a severe case of crisis. Now, one of the reasons why China has got itself into this situation is because of the single child policy that it brought in 1980, which was actually designed to reduce the growth in the population. At that time, China expected that its population would continue rising, and in order to combat that, it limited the amount of children that people could have. But the flip side of that is that we've now got a reducing amount of people entering the workforce every single year, and at the same time, there are more people retiring. 10 years ago in China, for every single retired person, there were 10 workers. Today, for every retired person, there are 5 workers. In 2030, it's estimated that there'll only be 4 workers for every retired person. And by 2050, there will only be 2 people working for every person retired. Now, obviously, that doesn't stack up. You can't have that level of contribution. So in order to redress the balance, China is going to have to move its retirement age. It's going to have to increase it. And when you look at what's happened around the rest of the world, most developed countries are moving to having parity between men and women. So we don't have this differential that we've got in China at the moment, where there's potentially a 10-year age gap between women that are working in factories and men that work in factories. And when you look at what's happened in the rest of the world, they've also increased the retirement age. And we're now getting to the point where a lot of developed economies are saying it at 67. So if that was to be introduced in China, that would be a huge difference. You could have women working in factories who are currently expecting to retire at 50, suddenly being told that they're going to have to work until 67, another 17 years. That is a big change to people's working conditions. But unfortunately in China, most people don't have an employer pension or a private pension, so they are fully dependent on the state. And if the state decides that it's going to change the rules and that you're going to have to work for another 10, 15, 17 years, then there isn't really much that many people can do about that. So that does look like an easy fix, just change the retirement age. But the problem that causes is that all of the young people want to come into the workforce. Now, a lot of the jobs in China are state-sponsored, and so you've got a job for life. So if you're told that you're going to have to work for another 10 or 15 years, that means that that job won't be available to a young worker for another 10 or 15 years. So basically, all of those 16 to 24-year-olds that we looked at in the unemployment stats, the 17% that currently are out of work, they're not going to see those opportunities coming along for a long time. So if China does move its retirement age, it could cause stagnation in the workforce. And the youth in China are already disaffected. They're already unhappy. They don't like the pension system. They think that they're funding all of these old people who are retiring. And so we've got a situation where something needs to be done to redress this balance. Over the long term, there may be a move towards more private pensions and employer pensions. But the problem that China has is that most people aren't earning enough to be able to justify that. They don't want to put aside a huge amount of their monthly salary if they're only being paid $20 per day. So the overall summary of today's video is that the pension system in China is broken. They've got an aging population. A lot of people are already retired. There's a whole lot more that are about to retire. They've got one of the lowest retirement ages in the world, and they've also got a huge amount of youth unemployment. And in order to fix this situation, it's likely that China will increase the retirement age. However, that will bring more problems because it's going to cause difficulty for the youth who are unemployed, and that could lead to high levels of youth unemployment, more people not working, and that could cause even more problems for the pension system. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video, you found it useful, informative and thought-provoking. Apologies for my voice, it's been a bit croaky today, don't know why, but hopefully it won't be on the next video. If you've liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end, and here's something to put a smile on your face.